Let's get to our coverage of the Missouri primaries. While you were sleeping, the final results came in for most of the state's races.
Yeah, News 4 is bringing you live team coverage of the key decisions. And News 4's Lacy she's covering the results for St. Louis County Executive. But first, our Justin Andrews is covering a primary election shocker.
Justin, Cori Bush defeated longtime Congressman Lacy Clay.
Yes, she did. She calls it historic, sending a black working-class single mother to Congress. Late last night, she says, quote, "We about to change the world."
They counted us out. They called me, I'm just the protester. I'm just the activist with no name, no title, and no real money. That's all they said that I was. But St. Louis showed up today, so St. Louis showed up. It's the ball.
That was Cori Bush, a progressive and activist, tried unseating Clay in 2018, but didn't have the money or name recognition to spark a legitimate challenge. This time, she was able to pull out the victory. In November, the first congressional seat is expected to go to the Democrats. The U.S. House seat has been held by Clay and his father since 1969. Lacy Clay is the 7th House incumbent to lose a primary in this election cycle. Bush ran on a promise of progress, saying it is time for someone who understood the issues St. Louisans face to represent them in Washington. This seat encompasses St. Louis City and North County. She will be the first female and first black woman for the House district.
Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Wednesday, August the 5th, 2020. The audio you just heard, Cori Bush. Cori Bush, the progressive, the black woman, and soon to be Congresswoman Cori Bush of the 1st District of Missouri. On this episode of The Politicrat, a look at the progressive movement and its showing in recent elections in this calendar year of 2020 and the progression towards the progressives in the United States. That, plus 2 more states, Massachusetts and Michigan, on voting. Next. Welcome back. A huge victory last night for Cori Bush in St. Louis, Missouri, the Missouri 1st Congressional District. And my goodness me, what an upset. The biggest upset of this calendar year so far in elections. Seeing Cori Bush, who really had not been given a chance against Democrat William Lacy Clay, who had held the seat for something like 19 years or so. And his father had held it since the 1969. I mean, this is incredible. 1969, the Clay family has held on to that seat in Congress. And against that, Cori Bush was running. She was running against a machine. And she prevailed by just over 4,000 votes to sensationally upset William Lacy Clay and the machinery of the Democratic Party. Now, it is almost assured, of course you have to have the election this November, but it is almost assured that Cori Bush will prevail this November. She will be seeing off, I'm sure, a Republican opponent. Cori Bush, as a progressive, ran against Lacy Clay in 2018. In fact, her run for that seat, the same seat in the 1st District of Missouri, was profiled in the Netflix documentary Knock Down the House. And Knock Down the House featured the campaigns of AOC, of Rashida Tlaib, I believe Ilhan Omar, among others. Now, 2 years ago, Cori Bush was not successful. She did not have a lot of money, as that report you heard at the beginning indicated. And she didn't have any real name recognition. Cori Bush was an activist and still is an activist, Black Lives Matter activist in Missouri, in St. Louis City, in that area. And she decided that enough was enough. And she, in one of her hashtags on Twitter, and her Twitter handle is at Cori Bush, all one word. One of the things you will see is her Twitter handle has also this hashtag in some of her tweets, and I believe it's from protest to politics or from protest to power, something like that. And this is something that people should really take stock of. We continue to see protests all over the United States for Black Lives Matter and against police brutality and against an education system that strangles black and brown children and against a system that oppresses black people and oppresses brown people and oppresses Native American people. We continue to see those protests day after day after day all over the country. Now, the media, again, the news media in this country is not covering them anymore, but they are continuing on. They're continuing on in Portland. They're continuing on in Seattle. They're continuing on in the Midwest, on the East Coast, everywhere, the South, the West Coast. These protests are continuing. And Cori Bush has translated her activism and protest into politics and power. And what you're going to see this November is a history-making feat. In that particular district in Missouri, in the 1st District, Cori Bush will become the first female and the first black woman to hold congressional office in that district in the history of the country. That's something to really marvel at when you consider just 2 years ago, she ran with virtually no recognition at all name-wise and very little money. But she didn't give up. She came back 2 years later and on the back of a movement propelled herself to a sensational upset win. The biggest in all of American politics thus far in this election year 2020. Cori Bush, again, as I said, is a progressive. She was backed by Bernie Sanders. She was backed by AOC and Ilhan Omar and all the other tried and true progressives out there. So, congratulations, I should say right now. If I didn't say it earlier, I'll say it now. Congratulations to you, Cori Bush, on a very well-run race and a sensational win. And I urge people to donate to her campaign this November as she will go up against a Republican opponent for what is a heavily and traditionally Democratic district. Imagine knocking off the machinery of the corporate Democratic Party and doing it so sensationally. Just 2 years after falling to that same candidate, you come right back and pull off a marvelous win. Certainly the Black Lives Matter movement has helped. Certainly the tide in this country has helped. As a matter of fact, we have started to see a turning tide in this country over the last 5+ years. We have seen a turning of the screw as progressive politics reinvigorates itself in the United States. We have seen that with Bernie Sanders in these 2 presidential runs. We have seen that with AOC and, as I said before, Ilhan Omar. As I've said before, Rashida Tlaib, who, by the way, won her primary last night in Michigan. We've seen this with Ayanna Pressley in Massachusetts. We've seen this in a great many places over the last couple of years or so. In 2018, where you had that impressive wave of progressives and women and black women and Muslim women coming into office, Native American women coming into office, Deb Haaland in Congress, among others. And I forget the name of the other female congressperson who also got in. I think her name is Sherry, and I forget her last name, unfortunately. But you have an unprecedented changing of the guard now in the House of Representatives. But you also have this change in races across the country. You are beginning to see what change looks like. In 2018, Jared Polis was elected governor of Colorado, the first openly gay governor of that state. We've had trans individuals be elected to office, to supervisor positions. We have an example of that in Minnesota. We've had examples of that, I believe, in Wisconsin and in Illinois and certain other places across the country. We've had Black, Latinx politicians all being elected, and being elected on really progressive platforms over the last 5 years. We are seeing progressivism make a strong statement right here in 2020. Earlier this year, Marie Newman in Illinois' 3rd Congressional District, a progressive, upset the very conservative Democrat, Dan Lipinski, who had held that seat for a while. He was really everything but a Democrat. He was essentially a Republican in Democratic clothing, if you will. Marie Newman, though, scored a sensational victory in that race back in March of this year, March or April, I think it was March. A sensational win at the time that COVID was just beginning to hit the consciousness in America. That was a sensational victory for Marie Newman in the 3rd Congressional District in Illinois. That was the primary, and she is expected to go on and win this November. Then in April, we had in the Wisconsin Supreme Court, the Republican-controlled Wisconsin Supreme Court, we had a contest between the very conservative judge, Daniel Kelly, who was backed by Donald Trump at the time, and the Democrat, who was seen as liberal, if not progressive, and there is a difference, I think. I'm not a fan of the liberal label, if you will, but she was a Democrat, and her name is Jill Karofsky, and Jill Karofsky defeated the conservative judge, Daniel Kelly, in what was a huge upset. And that happened in April. And the majority that the Republicans enjoyed on the Wisconsin Supreme Court went from 5-2 to 4-3. So now the court in Wisconsin, the Supreme Court, which has been a very political outfit under the Republican control, has gone to 4 Republicans and 3 Democrats. This was a huge, huge win in Wisconsin for Jill Karofsky and the Democrats. And sensationally, just a few days ago, 3 or 4 days ago, which is just incredible, she was sworn in 3 days ago, sworn in as the Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice during a 100-mile run. I kid you not. Jill Karofsky, the Democrat, had run 35 miles in a 100-mile marathon race. And I am literally dead serious about this. After the 35th mile, she stopped in a field, microphone set up, American flag and state flag of Wisconsin set up, and a fellow Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice, Rebecca Dallett, who also was running this race, administered the swearing in of Jill Karofsky. This is remarkable. It's in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. And the title of the article is "A Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice was sworn in after she ran 35 miles. Then she started running another 65. The article's by Patrick Marley. Remarkable stuff. She was sworn in on Saturday, this past Saturday. Saturday, August the 1st. Remarkable. There's a photo of her standing there in her shorts, being sworn in by another Supreme Court Justice in her shorts, because they're both running. And you have a former governor of the state, Jim Doyle, watching on, and you have her children, Jill Karofsky's children, standing next to her. Her 2 children, Danny and Daphne. Danny and Daphne. And they're standing there watching their mother being sworn in, and she's in her shorts. Obviously now this is because we are now in the coronavirus 19 era. So things are different. And what is different now is that liberals, and particularly I would say the progressive movement, is making a move in this country. The progressive movement is making its mark. In June, Jamal Bowman in New York's 16th Congressional District took on longtime incumbent Eliot Engel, who had held the seat for over 30 years. Jamal Bowman, a progressive and a school principal, African-American man, taking on Eliot Engel, the white male congressman, who again had been part of the political landscape in the Democratic Party in New York politics for 30 years or so. Jamal Bowman not only scored the upset victory, he destroyed Eliot Engel on election night by a 2-1 margin. It was something like 63% to 36% or something like that. 65 to 36, 63 to 30, whatever it was. It was a nearly 2-1 margin. It was a staggering, throttling victory. The voters rejected Eliot Engel overwhelmingly and said, "Come on down, Jamal Bowman," and he did. The result was not made official until about maybe 2 weeks ago, nearly a month or so after. I mean, this is something we already knew. I mean, we knew on election night that Jamal Bowman had won. I mean, he had the 2-1 margin on election night in June. I think it was June the 23rd or so in New York. But there had been lots of problems in New York. They'd never had any early voting before. They're going to obviously be changing that. And they have changed it. And it took forever for folks to count ballots and all of this. But what they had counted, and it was something like 90%, 95% in. I mean, it was like 99% of the vote was in. And for some reason, New York did not declare the winner officially until something like a month later, which really made no sense to me. But that's neither here nor there. The fact of the matter is, nothing can take away the fact that Jamal Bowman, a New York City school principal, was able to drum out of office a 30-plus year incumbent named Eliot Engel. And no one knew who Jamal Bowman was. Literally a few weeks ago, nobody knew. Certainly not the national conscience in this country. Hardly anybody outside of New York knew who on earth Jamal Bowman was. And he stormed to victory. He really did. It was one of the most impressive victories American politics has seen in recent years. But I think none was more impressive than Cori Bush last night, who, again, as I said, just 2 years ago, lost in this very same election race against the very same opponent. She absolutely stunned not only William Lacy Clay, but a lot of people who doubted her. William Lacy Clay ran his election campaign as well. These activists, you can't just be an activist. You've got to get things done. And I'm here and I have a track record of getting things done. I've done the work. I've got the experience. She's just an activist. That was the basic tenor of William Lacy Clay's campaign. Vote for me. I've been here forever. I've got things done. She's an upstart. She's an activist. She has no experience. Activists don't really do anything. Well, yeah, they do. They make change.
Now, the final numbers came in overnight for Amendment 2 as well, which would expand Medicaid in Missouri. 53% of people voted yes on that issue. We'll have much more on what this means for many low-income Missourians coming up next in our next half hour. And we'll continue.
Welcome back. That was part of the KMOV KMOV4 news broadcast from earlier today, I guess it was. And they were also the company you heard with the sound at the beginning of this episode. Progressivism is continuing to make its mark in this country. We have had so many years of centrist, neoliberalist, corporate democratic, and Republican rulership in this country in all facets. And what you are seeing in these primaries so far this year, and what you've been seeing in these elections over the last 5 years or so, is a decided shift, not just to the left, but to the progressive left. Yesterday in Missouri, as you just heard, the Medicaid expansion was approved in a heavily controlled Republican state. A state, as I said, controlled by Republicans in the Midwest. The Medicaid expansion passed 53 to 47%. 50% was needed to pass. And this Medicaid expansion amendment passed comfortably with 53% of the voters voting yes. Would this have happened had it not been for the coronavirus pandemic? It's probably very difficult to say, because things were moving in this direction prior to this pandemic, and I think it's important to say that. Things, meaning the political currents, were moving more left prior to last night's election in Missouri and all of these elections that we've seen over the last few weeks and months. Now, while it's true that the national office has been a bit more on the centrist side, you had Joe Biden defeating Bernie Sanders, and now even with Bernie Sanders starting out very, very well in this year's presidential race, and a lot of us will contend that there was chicanery going on during that race in terms of voting. Even with the fact that the national offices tend to be a bit more centrist, at least at the moment, what you're seeing on the state and local level is progressive politics working its way in. Not just into the mainstream, but working its way in as the mainstream itself, working its way in as the dominant place and the force to be reckoned with. And we're seeing it. Would this Medicaid expansion have passed 10 years ago in Missouri? I would say not. Would it have passed 5 years ago? Maybe. Would it have passed 2 years ago? Maybe it would have. I think it would have been heading in this direction a couple of years ago. But now, certainly with what we've seen with this pandemic and what we've seen with progressives who are looking at you and not at their own power and status, you are seeing voters respond. And if Missouri is an example of that in the heartbeat of the Midwest, then that certainly says and bodes well for what we could be seeing this coming November. And not just in the White House, but all over the country, in state houses, all up and down from across the country, north and south, east and west. I think that you have now on your hands a progressive revolution. This is the political revolution that Bernie Sanders has been talking about, not just for these 2 presidential runs that he's done, but really for all of his 40-year career in politics. He's been talking about a political revolution since he became mayor of Burlington, Vermont, back in the 1980s. This is something that is happening in this country now. The Black Lives Matter movement has pushed this now. We are seeing this. Cori Bush as an activist, a Black Lives Matter activist, winning election, sensationally knocking off William Lacy Clay. And she is going to go to Congress in November. We have to donate to her campaign and to any campaign like Jamal Bowman, like Marie Newman. I mean, it's inevitable that they're all going to win because these are all heavily Democratic seats anyway. You don't take anything for granted, though. But just imagine the millions of people who over the last 3 months now have been engaged in activism. Just imagine if a fraction of those individuals run for office in the next couple of years. And if you think that that's not going to happen, you'd better think again. You don't think some of those activists in New York, you don't think some of those activists in Los Angeles, you don't think some of those activists in San Francisco, you don't think some of those activists in Portland, you don't think some of those activists in Seattle, you don't think some of those activists in Atlanta are going to run for political office of some kind? It doesn't have to be Congress. It could be state legislature. It could be board of supervisors in your city. It could be school board. It could be dog catcher. If just a fraction of those millions of people who we have seen on the streets and continue to see on the streets, if just a fraction of them ran for political office in 2022, by the time we get to that calendar year and the elections, I would submit to you that a good many of those people, in fact, would be elected to Congress or to whatever race they chose to run, whether it be governor, whether it be state senator, whether it be state legislative representative, whatever it was, state senator, that's the same thing. But whatever that race might be, there is no limit. You have a new generation who is not going to put up with the kind of tomfoolery that has been going on in politics and in the establishment of politics. These are the real folks. If you want to talk about a populist, populists are people like Cori Bush. Populists are people like AOC. Populists are people like Ilhan Omar, all of whom are going to be running this November on re-election, except for Cori Bush. She's going to be running for her first election to actually appear in Congress for the first time. Populists are not Donald Trump. Populists are not people like that. There has been this kind of subversion of that term and the sabotaging of that term. But the real populists are these progressives. Bernie Sanders would be an example of that as well. It's an amazing story that we're seeing. Jamal Bowman would be an example of that kind of person, a true populist, a progressive. And these are the kinds of stories that are going to be much more of the landscape over the next few years. The country is becoming more brown and the country is becoming more black. We are beginning to see, particularly with Latina and Latinos, Latinx, a transformational shift in the political landscape. People want help. People need help. And one of the reasons I think this Medicaid expansion passed in Missouri last night was because people are in need of help. You've got food bank lines all over this country running for miles on end. It's barely being talked about in the press now. But for 3 months plus, food bank lines have absolutely blanketed America from coast to coast. People who have never waited online for anything but a concert ticket are now waiting on lines to buy food. You've got a Republican-controlled U.S. Senate that has shown little to no inclination whatsoever to provide for the general health and welfare of the average person in this country, making excuses as to why they shouldn't put a $600 provision into unemployment benefits, making excuses as to why that should no longer continue. Well, late last night, the Grim Reaper, aka Moscow Mitch, the Senate Majority Leader, the Republican Mitch McConnell, said that he would be open to keeping the $600 provision in this new bill that is still being negotiated by the Senate, the House, and the White House. Even if he didn't agree with parts of it, he said he would be open to agreeing a deal with the Democrats. Guess who's running for his Senate seat? Guess who's running this November to hold on to his Senate seat? Welcome back. So that's really the overview of what happened yesterday in a number of races, particularly focusing on Missouri. And there are others that took place. Michigan, I told you about Rashida Tlaib. She won her primary fairly easily, actually, pretty convincingly. And there were a number of other states, Washington State and a couple of other states, I think Kansas. The thing coming out of Kansas that you should know is Chris Kobach, the man who invented, really, cross-check, the voter stealing program, the program that would suppress millions of votes, as he did with that program in 2016. Some 7 million people had their votes suppressed through Chris Kobach's cross-check system, which is now being employed and has been employed all over the country. Kobach ran for a seat yesterday. I think he was running for the Senate or for governor. He's been running recently, and he lost his previous run. I think it was for Senate, and I think he ran for governor this time around, or maybe it was the other way around, and he ended up losing in the primary, in the Republican primary last night, which was a big relief to a lot of the Republicans because they did not want to deal with having someone like Chris Kobach, or an extremist, really, and a vote stealer. He's a vote suppressor. And he was on Donald Trump. He actually headed Donald Trump's voter commission, infamously in 2017. And he was the one that sent out calls to people in every state. Telling all the secretaries of state, well, can you please furnish your information about voting tallies and vote registration? I want your registration list. Which really was an invitation for him. What he was really doing was asking these states, all of these secretaries of state in every state, to turn over their voting lists to him so that he could purge them, so that he could purge the voters off of them. That's really what that was about. None of the secretaries of state turned in any kind of list, any kind of reports to Chris Kobach. In fact, Chris Kobach at the time, if I'm not mistaken, was Secretary of State of Kansas. And even he didn't turn in his own voting statistics to his own voter commission. It doesn't get any more laughable than that, does it? Promptly after all of that, promptly after every Secretary of State in the country said no, no, and no, Donald Trump's voter commission to establish voter fraud. Of course, there's very little of that anyway. That voter commission was disbanded almost as quickly as it was started. Now, the states. By the way, Neil Young is suing Donald Trump and his campaign for violating his copyright law and just, for playing songs without his permission at campaign rallies. Neil Young suing for $150,000 at least. Donald Trump playing Neil Young's songs at Donald Trump's political rallies without the permission of Mr. Young or his record company or anything like that. So we'll see how that goes. Now the states. And we are now up to Massachusetts. Massachusetts, one of the easiest websites you will ever have the pleasure of navigating. If you are a Massachusetts voter, you will enjoy this. You have to go to the following website. SEC, Sam Edward Charlie, that's sec.state.ma.us/ELE. Once you go and type in that web address, you will be taken to the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts homepage, or the Elections Division homepage. William Francis Galvin is your Secretary of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and you will see Elections Division on that page. Below that, you will see 8 boxes. One of them will say online voter registration. Another of them will say, am I registered to vote? Those are 2 of the 8 boxes you will find. It's such a really good, helpful presentation of these boxes. There's some very, very simple, easy, and clear directives. Everything you need is right in front of you. So if you want to find out about early voting, you click on that. Early voting, by the way, for the November 3rd general election in Massachusetts is from October the 17th. That's when it begins, and it ends on October the 30th. I mean, everything is right there in front of you. If you want to click on online voter registration, you just click on online voter registration, and it gives you these choices of what you'd like to do today. Register or pre-register to vote, update your name, check your registration information. So if you want to register to vote, you can click on the online voter registration system that is very, very clearly labeled once you get to the website, or you can just check your registration. And as I always say, make sure that you check your voter registration once a week, every week through the end of October. There's information on that Elections Division page about vote by mail, find my election office. I mean, this is it's fantastic. It's a fantastic website, just like Kentucky's and just like Maryland's. The Massachusetts website for voters is one of the very best and one of the easiest to navigate. It's very, very simple. And I think that if you are in Massachusetts, you should thank the Secretary of State there, Secretary of the Commonwealth. And you should also thank those who designed this website, because my goodness me, you couldn't have an easier website. You really couldn't. I mean, this is phenomenal. Everything is there on that page. You really don't have to leave that page, quite frankly. It's just terrific. You've got all of this information, and it's in easy to see locations. It's easy to see. It's easy to navigate. The voter registration deadline is 10 days before the election. So my math is not as good as it used to be. But count back, count back 10 days from November the 3rd. That's the deadline to register to vote in Massachusetts. Whatever date that is, I don't even know whether. But you can find out, because if you are not sure what that date is, then you can call the Board of Elections. This is what's so great about this website. You can actually call them. You can absolutely get in touch with the folks there at the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. They've got a contact us header at just above where it says Elections Division. You click on Contact Us, and there are a wealth of phone numbers. And this is really good stuff. And you go to the one that says Elections and Voting, and they've given you the address there, the contact, the phone number for Elections and Voting from Massachusetts. In terms of that website, is 800-462-VOTE. That's 800-462-VOTE. Locally in Massachusetts, it's 617-727-2828. And then there's an email address too, elections@sec.state.ma.us. So, look, this is one of the best and easiest websites to navigate if you are a voter in Massachusetts. It's one of the best in the country. And as I said, in the next couple of weeks or so, I'm going to be ranking and compiling all of these states. And I'm going to be ranking these websites by ease of use and presentation, because you need to have a good website if you have online access. And I know there's still a great many who don't. Online access requires that you have a very clear, clean, easy to navigate website. And with everything going on in this world, the average person has very little time to hunt for important information. Now, if you're shopping, that's another story. If you're shopping for goods, you could take an hour. You could take 2. But when it comes to your vote, people want to be in and out. They want to get the information and they want to go. So, in terms of getting the information and going, the Massachusetts website at sec.state.ma.us/ELE is terrific. It's really top class. I'm going to talk now about Michigan. Not necessarily the easiest website to navigate, but still a good website. By and large, it's Michigan, whose Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, is a good Secretary of State, by the way. I think she's very good. She's been one of the foremost leaders, actually, on getting out ballots early and all this kind of thing. She's been very good, actually. Jocelyn Benson has put her foot down against some of the incursions of the Republican legislature in Michigan. And you may remember that a few months ago I had on this podcast a journalist from the Michigan Advance. Her name is Susan Demas, and she explained some of the things that were going on inside of Michigan politics in the state legislature and the Republican battles with the Michigan Democratic governor, Gretchen Whitmer. And we've seen, of course, the horror of what happened in April and May at the state capitol there, where you have these white racists with nooses and swastikas and Barbie dolls and nooses on top of that, and death threats to the governor of Michigan, Governor Whitmer. And it was just ugly and disgusting and vile. And not one of these people was arrested. They were carrying they're carrying weapons, they're carrying guns. None of them was arrested. None of them was treated the way that George Floyd was treated. None of them was murdered, and I'm not advocating for anybody to be treated like that. No one should be murdered. No one should be chokeholded like that. George Floyd should still be alive. But all of this is to say that the Michigan Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, has done I think, a very good job. I just wish the website was executed as well as the job that Jocelyn Benson is doing as Secretary of State. I just wish that would have happened, but you can't have everything the way you want it, I guess. Michigan voters, please go to the following website, michigan.gov/SOS. That's michigan.gov/Sam Oscar Sam. That will get you to the Office of the Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, and it will get you straight to the election area. And you will see elections, driver's license, state ID, vehicles, blah, 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 blah. I would scroll down. You will see a young man smiling at you, young African-American man with a smile on his face. He's steering, got his hand on the steering wheel. I don't see any police, thank goodness, pointing at him, pointing a gun at him. Forgive my gallows humor. Not really funny at all, is it? But you will see a young man smiling at you, his hand on the steering wheel, and then you will scroll through, and then you will see elections on the left-hand side. How to register to vote online, find your polling station, and that's really where you want to go if you want to register to vote. So you click on register to vote online, and then you will see something that says Michigan Online Voter Registration. And you can begin to go through the prompts there. Also on that page, on the left-hand side, you will see your voter information. It's at the top, actually, on the left-hand side of that same page. You click on your voter information, and that's essentially if you want to check your registration. And you just go and follow the prompts there, fill in your name and first name, last name, etc., and then you just go from there. So you can search also by your driver's license number as well, and that is for finding out if you are registered. So you check your voter registration there. And that's essentially it for Michigan. I mean, the site's good. I just think that you unfortunately have to hunt around a little bit to find certain things. I mean, that was pretty self-explanatory, I think you will say. But everything is you do have to hunt for certain things. You have to hunt for the contact information. You have to hunt for finding out about when you are able to early vote, if at all. You have to find out when the registration deadline is. And in the case of Michigan, I found this out by going to vote.org. And the Michigan deadline to register to vote is 15 days before the general election. So that is, if it's online, it's 15 days before. If it's by mail, it's postmarked 15 days before. Now look, as I said before, when you're dealing with the mail, you really, at this point, don't want to take chances with all of this. There's going to be a meeting, and there is a meeting today happening, and it may well have already happened, with members of the Senate and the new Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, who has been an absolute nightmare. He's a Trump crony, and he has been slowing down the mail with Trump's approval and assent and direction. And the mail has been drastically slow. I wonder how many of you have received mail in the last 3 days. I've not received mail since Friday. And here we are this is just crazy. It's been 5 days now, and it's Wednesday, and I've not received a piece of mail since Friday. That's the last time I received a piece of mail. Now, if you hear that, that should send some alarm bells to you, because here in California, I know for a fact that there have been mailing operations that have slowed down. It's happening in a few other states as well, but it's really happening all over the country. This assault on Nevada as well. Oh, we're going to sue Nevada. What, because they're exercising their democratic right to vote by mail? Because the Secretary of State and the governor are sending out mail-in ballots in a coronavirus pandemic where over About 160,000 people have died from coronavirus, and now what? They have to go and all vote in person because you don't like the fact that people are voting by mail, even though you vote by mail? All of these Trump people, they all vote by mail, for goodness sake. Donald Trump votes by mail. Ivanka Trump votes by mail. Jared Kushner votes by mail. Bill Barr votes by mail. Kayleigh McEnany votes by mail. All of these people vote by mail. All of them. You've even got Lara Trump making robocalls here to California, telling people, you can vote by mail, it's okay. Just vote for my vote for my uncle. Vote for my vote for my father-in-law. I mean, that's what's going on. Donald Trump Jr. is doing the same thing. He votes by mail, and he's making robocalls to various places around the country to his supporters. Vote by mail. Remember, you can vote by mail. It's crazy. And at the very same time, you've got Donald Trump screaming about, well, vote by mail is rigged. No, it's not. The Marines, the military have been voting by mail in this country forever. People have been casting votes from other countries forever. There's not been an issue with it. This is a bunch of nonsense. It's an attempt to confuse you, and I really would advise you to ignore this nonsense. It's an attempt to cast doubt by repeating the same thing over and over and over again, just like Goebbels. Trump is hoping that the lie sinks in, and for some people it will. There'll be that 2 or 3% that go, ooh, I'm not so sure. Well, this is how you do this. You combat all of that by making sure you send that ballot in early, by calling up your local board of elections and demanding that ballot now, or by going to your board of elections and picking up a ballot. If they are available, go there. Call them, ask them. Go there. And then just drop it off, fill out the ballot, and then drop it off. Do not delay, do not procrastinate. That's how you get around all of this. All this confusion is designed to trick you. It's a voter suppression tactic. And I wish that CNN, by the way, would not have all of these, book all these Trump guests who are there to gaslight and lie to you and confuse you. And they do it for ratings, but at the expense of the American public. Voter registration in Massachusetts is 20 days before Election Day. So you count back 20 days before that November 3rd date, and that will be your deadline for voting for registering to vote in Massachusetts. Now be aware, please, do not wait until that date. You should be registering to vote right now in Massachusetts, right now in Michigan, and you should be checking your voter registration every week. Every single week from now through the end of October, just to make sure that you've not been bounced off the voting rolls. Make sure that you also call your local board of elections and ask for a mail-in ballot. I know they say they're supposed to automatically send them, but do not rely on that. There is a problem with the mail, and that's a fact. So you need to get active now, and you need to get involved. And you need to call your board of elections and ask for your ballot. Or go down to your board of elections if you can, if you're able to, and pick up a ballot. Go home, fill it out, mail it in. Don't wait. Or drop it off. Better yet, just drop it back off at the board of elections. I mean, I think that's the best thing to do, is to go home, fill out the ballot, and then if you can, drive back or wherever you have to go by public transportation, drop off the ballot right there. I mean, drop off the ballot at the office. And you can do that in many states. There are drop boxes in some states. Donald Trump's trying to get rid of that. I mean, this guy wants to make sure that he steals this election again. This guy's been a criminal all his life. What would make you or anyone else think that he would stop now that he's in the White House? This is all he knows. So instead of, as I've said before, responding to every stupid thing he says or does or dangerous thing he does, let's plan for November. Let's plan now. Early vote. If you're uncomfortable with vote by mail, which you shouldn't be, because I've suggested to you that you should get your ballot early, demand your ballot early, and mail it back early, or drop it off at the office early, the state Board of Elections office or your county Board of Elections office. Drop it off at a drop box early. Do not procrastinate. Procrastination is the biggest enemy of human beings when it comes to getting things done. You've got to fight through that. It's not easy, but you've got to fight through it. Or vote early. When your state does early voting in person, take advantage of it. Make sure you go and vote early in person when you know that date comes. And in Massachusetts, it's October the 17th, I believe, through the 30th. When October 17th comes, that first day, boom. Massachusetts voters, you should absolutely be wherever the polls are that have early voting for that date, starting on the 17th of October. That's what you should be doing. Vote on that first day. Get it done, get it out the way. These votes that are done before November 3rd are going to all be counted first. I mean, they're all going to be, you are going to be banking your vote. The earlier you do this, the better it is for you, and the safer it is for you, because there's going to be less lines. There's going to be very few people on the first day of early voting. Most people, I dare say, don't even know what the first day of early voting is in many of these states, which is why it's important that you pass this information on. So keep all of that in mind. And by the way, keep in mind the following. As a reminder, this Friday, I will be hosting a discussion of the film I Am Not Your Negro. It's a documentary directed by Raoul Peck that covers James Baldwin and Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The documentary, I Am Not Your Negro, is available right now on Netflix. If you are a Netflix subscriber, I urge you to take advantage of watching that documentary. Now, it may be available on other platforms, but I do know that for sure Netflix has the documentary. Join me this Friday, August 7th, from 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, for a discussion and conversation about the film I Am Not Your Negro. I'll be doing this on behalf of the Mechanics Institute Library, who do a great job of hosting film discussions, and their hard work brings us to this month of August and the Cinema-Lit film series Black Lives on Film. I Am Not Your Negro is the film that I'll be discussing. If you want to participate in that discussion, in that conversation, please register right now. You can sign up at milibrary.org/events. Scroll down until you find I Am Not Your Negro. Please sign up now. It's free of charge. And I'll see you on Friday night at 6 p.m. Pacific Time, 9 p.m. Eastern. Join me. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.